today we're going to be talking about arrays. So these are our lesson objectives. We'll first talk about what an array is and how to access it and change the elements, all that good stuff. And then I will demo and Replit very quickly because we do have a lot of stuff to get through and there's an activity. Of course, if we can't finish the activity, we can always move it to next class. And then you can share your solutions with the class, although I'm not sure if we're going to have time for that. Okay, so first, what is an array? Well, to put very simply, array is a list of variables of the same type. So for example, a list of ints, a list of strings, a list of characters, a list of basically anything, any data type that we've done so far, like characters, booleans, etc., etc. You can have as many or as few variables as you want. There have been instances of arrays that has nothing in it, that has 0 elements in it. But that's not very useful, right? Most arrays can go up to like infinity or as much as your computer can store without crashing. But usually it's just about like 10, 20 elements that we will be working with in this class, maybe even less than that. All right, so how do we declare an array? Well, declaring an array is very similar to how we declared other variables before. So first we declare what type of array we want it to be. If we want it to be array of strings, we type string and then 2 brackets. And remember, we use these square brackets. We use these square brackets for arrays, and then a name. This is declare but not define. Usually you can do with like these things. You declare this variable, say that this is a array of strings and that's the name, but we don't actually put anything in it. That's like a rare instance. And the more common instance is that we will declare an array and we also define it. And declaring and defining is very similar. We do have a type, that's the string type, and then we have these brackets. These brackets basically show that it's an array. Like the difference between like an array of strings and like a single string is that there's these brackets. Of course, that's the name, and then there's the equal sign. Remember, equal sign is defining something in Java. And then we use the big curly brackets to tell what's in the array. And each element that's in the array is separated by commas. Now notice these are separated by commas and not semicolons, unlike like for loops. It's very important to remember that these are separated by commas, because if they're not separated by commas, the computer will probably throw an error. Again, similarly, there's an array of ints. You first define it as an int, and then you put the brackets, and then the name, and then the equal sign, and then the actual values that you want to go in the array. And the reason that there's quotation marks around the values in the array of strings is, remember, strings always have quotation marks around them. Okay, a reminder that strings always have quotation marks around them. Another note that is very good to remember is that arrays are not included in the Java package. You need to import them. So similar to scanners, arrays are not used like all the time, unlike ints and strings and like other variables. They are not used all the time, which means that you have to import them. And to import them, there are 2 ways. There's import java.util.arrays. This is importing arrays. You might remember that importing scanners is similar. Let me just put it in the chat. Importing scanners is import java.util.scanners. Okay, that's how you import scanners. Or you can do import java.util.asterisk. And this means that you import basically all of the packages. And when you type this command right here, it imports arrays, scanners, a bunch of other stuff like array lists, a bunch of other stuff. Sometimes sometimes I do this, sometimes I do this. There's not really a difference. You can do either way, but make sure that your IDE is compatible with using this, because sometimes some IDEs might not be compatible with using that. It depends, always depends, right? So, be careful, check. And that's like, this is for Java only, right? If you know Python, you know that Python has another like different way of importing stuff. So any comments on this? No? Okay, let's move on. How do we access an array when we want to print out one of the elements in them? So when we access an array, remember there are multiple elements in an array, so we don't just say system.out.println cars like we would do with like a string, because a string only has like one element in it. An array of strings has several elements in it. That's where something called index comes in. So index is a number that's assigned to every element in the string, and indexes start from 0, and I have listed out a nice chart over here that's saying, so the first element, Volvo, has index number of 0, BMW has an index number of 1, Ford has 2, Mazda has 3, and it goes on and on. So if you have like 5 elements, the index number of the last element will be 4, okay? Because it starts at 0. So right here, we have system.out.println cars, bracket 0, and it prints out Volvo, because the index number of Volvo is 0. So that's why it prints out Volvo. And the format of printing out something of an array is the name of the array, and then bracket, and then the index number, and then close bracket. Next, we are going to be talking about how to change an array element. So you might remember when we have strings, when we change them, we just set like string car equals Volvo, and then later on we do cars equals BMW and stuff like that. It's very similar, except with arrays, you have to specify which element you're changing. If you don't specify which element you're changing, the computer is going to be confused and it's going to throw an error. So right here, we refer to the index number that we want to change and redefine it. And here we have cars, like which we've been working with so far. And cars 0 is Volvo, remember, and we change it to Opel. Now, what is printed out now? Let's give you 1 minute. Let's give everyone 1 minute to put their answers in the chat. This should be relatively easy. Oh, well, there's one answer, Opel. Well, it's about 1 minute now, so it is correct. Opel is correct. And the reason for that is because car 0, the index number of 0, it changed from Volvo to Opel. And now when we call car 0, it's now Opel instead of Volvo. This is changing an element in an array is very similar to changing like a variable. Like, for example, if we have like string car equals Volvo, and then we do car equals Opel, and then we do system.out.println car. It still prints out Opel. It because redefining it as like in an array is redefining. It's very similar to redefining it in like any other data format. Okay, now we're going to talk about some common uses for arrays, and one of the I'm not going to go through like from most common to least common. I'm just going to start from like most basic, and the most basic is how to find the length of an array. Sometimes you might be given an array that's very, very, very long, and you don't have the time to count through all the elements. You don't have the time to count through like all the commas. You can use array name.length, and then that automatically gives you the length of the array. So for example, string cars, still the same example. When we print this out, this will print 4 because there are 4 elements in this array. There are 4 elements that are separated by commas, and that's how the computer knows that there are 4 elements, so it prints out 4. You should note that there are no parentheses after length. The reason behind this is quite complicated, but we will not be getting into that. You guys might remember that math.random and like other math functions require like a parentheses after it, and methods do require a parentheses after it. But in this case, length does not require parentheses after it. Usually, like if you for some reason can't remember this, like me, basically if you put parentheses after it, the computer will probably throw an error, or it will not compile. Of course, it again depends on your IDE, but most of the IDEs I've used basically tell me that I should not have, like, there's an error on this line, I should not have a parentheses, and I take a parentheses and it compiles. So you know, very small thing to note, but it can mess you up sometimes, like forgetting a semicolon. Next is, how do we print the elements in an array? So it's actually very easy. I usually use a for loop, but you can, of course, just type out like print system.println cars1, system.println cars2, etc. But using a for loop is really easy because you basically just need 3 lines, 2 if you don't count this bracket right here. Basically 2 lines, and it prints out all of the elements in the array, no matter how long or how short the array is. Now, so let's go through this really quickly. Same example as always. We have for while int equals 0. Remember, int I always need to be equal to 0 because the index number for arrays starts at 0. I do not know why they made it that way, but that is the way that they made it. And of course, we just need to go with it. There's no way to change the first index to from 0 to 1. That's just how it is. So we always, when we're looping through an array and trying to print everything in the array, we always start from 0, and then we have I is less than cars.length. Now remember, it's always less than cars, like the length, okay? It's always less than the length, because here the length is 4, but the highest index number is only 3. If you go, if I do this, it will throw an error because on the last element is printed, it prints out system.out.println cars4, but there is no cars4. Okay, there is only cars3 because 3 is the highest index number there are. Because there is no cars4 and we're giving a command to print out cars4, the computer will throw an error and it will not compile or whatever. But it will basically be a mistake and the computer will like not do what you wanted to do. So remember, you always do I is less than cars.length. Or if you really like to be fancy, you can, I guess you can do this, but I haven't really seen anybody that done it in real life before. I usually just see it in like really complicated problems. So make sure that you do not go out of bounds. And when you do this, the error that is thrown is out of bounds error. Of course, this is out of bound exception. That's what they call it. Of course, this is not relevant information for the class. You do not have to memorize it, but knowing the different type of exceptions that are thrown helps you narrow it down to determine what the problem is when your code is not compiling. Of course, that's not something that's mandatory for this class. If you're interested, I can talk more about the different type of exceptions there are. Is anybody interested in learning a little tangent about exceptions? If not, we can keep moving. Okay.
What are tangents?
What?
What are tangents?
What did you say?
What are tangents? You said
go on a tangent about exceptions. Okay. Well, there are a few common exceptions. I think one of them is what I just talked about. It's out of bounds exception. Let me put that in the chat. It's the one that I was talking about specifically is array index out of bound exception. Now, if this exception shows up on your screen when you're trying to compile your code, you automatically know that you have an array that's that has an index number that's not non-existence. So for example, right here, this will give us an array out of bounds exception because cars 4 does not exist. It does not exist. Cars 3 is the highest that exists. And then there are other common exceptions. Can't think of any right off the top of my head. Oh yes, there's the runtime error. Runtime error are like a type of error, or like that's like no pointer exception. Or has anybody seen no pointer exception yet? Oh well, no pointer exception is also a common exception when there is oh wait, I'm stupid. I was directly messaging my TA instead of, okay, this was instead of putting it in the chat for everyone. Okay, so this is, and then no pointer exception. So no pointer exception is thrown when your code tries to use a null in a case where an object is required, and that happens when you, for example, we have string car, and then that's it. String car, and then that's it. And then we call system.out.println. Well, there is nothing in car. There is nothing in the car and in the variable that's named car. So, and nothing gets printed out. But because there's nothing, the computer can't print anything out, and that's an error. Okay. So that's like some of the more common exceptions. We did go off on a tangent, but that's okay. Yes, no is not the same thing as empty. Yes, did I insinuate that when I was talking about it already?
Oh no, you're good. I was just adding on to what you said.
Okay, cool. So right, it's a really confusing idea that, but no is not the same thing as empty. So for example, empty can be like this in the chat. So one second, I can't type. So let me put my chat in. So on string car, and there's nothing in it, that's empty. But if we do have like string car like this earlier that I typed in, there's literally not defined. I don't want to say nothing in there because nothing there is kind of like empty. But do you see the difference between this line and this line? That's what this is what causes the computer to throw a null pointer exception, while this doesn't. Because if we do system.out.println this, nothing gets printed out. But if we do system.out.println this, there is a exception. Okay. Does everyone understand these exceptions, especially array.index out of bound exception, array indexes, why this will be exception, and like why it prints out this instead of something else? Any questions at all about these? No? Okay, I should put my chat up. Put it on my other monitor. Okay, let's move on. All right, so there are some common uses for arrays, and we are going to be talking about the last common use in array that for this class. There, of course, there are other uses for arrays, but they're quite complicated, and we're not going to be getting into them for the duration of this course. And that is checking if two arrays are equal. Now, note, arrays are not primitive objects. They are not primitive objects, just like strings are not primitive objects. So you do not use the double equal sign to check if they are equal. Do you guys remember like string? We did string not equals a while earlier, and that's because string is not a primitive, so you can't do like string 1 equals string 2. You know, you guys remember that? Okay, well, arrays are the same thing. They're not primitive data types, so equals does not work. How do you check if two arrays are equals then? We use the equals parentheses array 1, array 2. We use this command. So there is a demo over here, and let's go through this. So first we import arrays, because in order to use arrays, we have to import them. Don't forget about that. If you see nothing wrong with your code and you don't know what's wrong, check if you imported arrays or if you imported scanners, because 9 times out of 10, that's where your mistakes are. This is spoken from personal experience. Right, and then we initialize the arrays. So object array. So right here, object can be like anything. It can be like a string, an int, a character, etc., etc. This person just used objects to be like more general. For the purpose of our class, we will be mostly using strings and ints, and maybe doubles. Character and booleans are quite rare. We probably won't be using them, but it's basically just string, ints, and doubles. So this is an array of ints. So we compare array 1 and array 2 through arrays dot equal array 1, array 2. You know, boolean retrieval is equal to whether these two are equal to or not. So, and then it prints out array 1, array 2 equal retrieval. So for this one, for retrieval, do you guys think retrieval is true or false? Put your answers in the chat. Let's give it like 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay. William thinks retrieval is false and retrieval 2 is true. Very nice. Does anybody else have a different answer? Does anybody else have any questions about this, or? Okay, well, it's about like a minute now, so congrats, William, you are correct. And that's because array 1 is not the same as array 2, and array 1 is the same as array 3. So it's pretty simple, right? You just compare whether these two are the same, and use arrays dot equals, just like string dot equals, right? And there's parentheses. Don't forget that there's always parentheses around the two values that's going to be passed in as parameters. Okay. Any questions on this page? No. Okay. Now we will be moving on to the part that's probably the most confusing, at least for me personally, when I was learning about arrays, of the entire lesson. So how do we set an array equal to another array? There are actually 2 ways to do it, and the first way is setting the reference point to the other reference point. So for example, we have string array 1 and array 2. And these are 2 array of strings, and they are different. So I didn't specify like what there was in there, but let's just assume that it's 2 arrays of different strings. Now, because they are 2 different arrays with different stuff inside them and initialized on different instances, they are stored in different places in the computer. Think of it like this. Whatever value that you assign to any like data type in Java gets stored in this little box that's in the back of the computer somewhere. It's like this very tiny little box that's in the back of the computer somewhere. And because these 2 are 2 different, the 2 different variables, 2 different data types, not data types, but like 2 different things, they go into different boxes. And there are two different boxes. So the stuff that's in this box, the stuff that's in array 1 gets stored in this box. The stuff that's in array 2 gets stored in this box. Well, when we set array 2 equal to array 1, we basically just change the reference point. So instead of retrieving the stuff that's in this box when we type out array 2 now retrieves the stuff that's in this box when we type out array 2, okay? Because now array 1, array 2 retrieves stuff out of the same box. There are several problems that's wrong with this one, because when calling array 2, it calls to where array 1 is stored. So if the contents of array 1 changes, the contents of array 2 will also change, and vice versa, because they have the same reference point. And because of that, it's very easy to make mistakes. So most people actively avoid doing it this way, and it's actually seen as an error, because now you have two things that goes by different names, but it's actually the same thing. When we go back to this slide, you can see, right, it started out as being two different things in two different boxes, but now this box is completely neglected, and array 2 now draws stuff out of this box. So there's actually a link here that I pasted into the chat. You guys can see that I pasted in the chat, and this basically takes me, This basically takes me to another website that talks more about why this is an error. So we are running a little short on time, so I will not be going through this with you guys, but I highly recommend that you guys check this out, because it really talks about how to make why this is an error, and it also shows you what is the correct way to copy an array. And so there's another way, that more commonly, like quote unquote correct way to set an array equal to another, and it's using a while or for loop. So here I use the for loop, but you can also use a while loop, because while loops and for loops are really similar. So I'm not going to demonstrate using a while loop here. But basically you can see that I am setting every value in array 2 to the corresponding value of the same index as array 1. So by the end of it, it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same values at the same index points for array 2 and array 1. Okay. So basically now we are going to do a very quick activity. I actually went over time a little bit. So you guys actually don't have much time to work on this activity, but it's basically make your array of random integers. The array can be as long or as short as you want it to be. It doesn't really matter, but we suggest around like 5 to 10 elements in the array. And then using a for loop or a while loop, find the largest number in the array. Now, very simple instructions, right? So some of you who have prior experience with Java or with coding might finish early. Some of you who doesn't have prior experience might have a little bit more trouble, but don't worry, we will be revealing the correct answers at the end of class. Bonus, if you finish early, you can try to find the largest number as well as the smallest number. So I will be sharing the solutions that I came up with you guys. Of course, there's not one way to do this. I just showed you guys 2 or 3 ways to do this. So first, you guys can see here is the int array of integers that I have defined, and then I have also defined a integer called max that is equal to the first value of the array. Now the reason I set it to the first value of the array instead of 0 is because it is possible that there might be negative values in the array, and it is also possible that all of the if we're doing like a minimum number, all of the numbers are greater than 0. So if we set it to 0, it might cause problems. Out of habit, I just set it to the first number in the array, and now remember the first number has an index of 0. And this is using a for loop to find the maximum number. So remember, we loop through every single number in the array. Now, if any number in the array is greater than max, we set max equal to that number. Let me comment this out. So if we run this, and now I have a print max, print min out here. The first number is max, the second number is the minimum. I defined the minimum over here, which is also equal to the first number of the array. Now, because we didn't do anything to the minimum, ignore the second number. There are, if you look at this, this is the largest number in this array of integers is 376, and that's what I did. That's 376 is the maximum that I printed out. Let's move on to using while loops. And now while loops are like very similar, except we have the initialization out and we have the increment here. But other than that, it's exactly the same. So not much to talk about here. Now, now that these two solutions down here also include the minimum. So if this number is smaller than minimum, which is currently equal to the first number of the array, if it is smaller than minimum, minimum now equals to this new number. So if we run it, we now see minimum. It prints out the smallest number in the array, which is negative 237. You take a look, negative 237 is indeed the smallest number in the array. Using while loop, very similar. It's still basically entirely the same. Oops, I've commented out the minimum. I'll try running it again. Okay, see, it's still the same because basically for loops and while loops, they work exactly the same. Now, classes are going to be over in a minute. If you guys have any questions, raise your hand or talk. If you don't have any questions, I will let you go and I will see you next class. Bye, guys.